What's up guys, also Football Talk here, back for the second part of this series. We already talked about the NFC in depth last week, going through the 4 divisions and pointing out one area each team could or should still be looking to address. Now it's time to run through the 16 franchises on the opposite side of the table and explain how I was led to my choice for each of them. Once again, this can be a proven starter, specific role player, or general depth at a position, depending on what the state of the roster looks like and how ready they are to compete. However, since you're not going to find a franchise quarterback or star pass rusher at this point of the calendar year, I wanted to stay realistic here and point out an asset they could actually still acquire via trade or among the few veteran names available on the open market. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to check out my divisional draft and roster review series, where I broke down every single pick made by all 32 NFL teams, laid out what role they could fulfill for their new squads, and discussed the classes as well as the general approach to roster construction. Let's get into it now though, with the AFC North, and first up we got the Baltimore Ravens. The position I outlined for them is hybrid safety. Looking at the Ravens defense last season, they improved from 28th in EPA per play across the first 8 weeks, all the way to number 5 from that point on, after they traded for all-pro linebacker Roquan Smith and started moving around the personnel a little bit. Kyle Hamilton was by far his best when he was a designated nickel as a rookie. Looking at the metrics of Pro Football Focus through the first 7 games compared to the final 10, which from that point onwards he spent the majority of snaps in the slot, his average grade improved from 65.6 to 72.4, and in the season a couple of elite ones, although somehow his final grade was actually at 87.6, so kinda explain that to me, PFF. His length took out the underneath passing windows, and defeat blockers from that spot was a major plus. Considering that, I was very surprised to see Baltimore basically gift one of the most underrated safeties in the league in Chuck Clark to the Jets for a 2024 7th round pick, with the reasoning behind it being the veteran was on the final year of his contract. Marcus Williams was a tremendous addition this past season, outside of missing 7 games with a hand injury, as a rangy ballhawk on the back end. However, now you're looking at Brandon Stevens having to step up from a solid rotational piece to starting at nickel potentially, while last year's 4th rounder Demarion Williams really struggled when asked to fill in there. If they did want to keep Hamilton down low, Geno Stone with less than 700 snaps through his first 3 years, even though his workload and quality of play have gradually increased, and Adarius Washington with a measly 32 snaps across his 2 seasons in Baltimore would be the designated options at safety. So I think another piece with the versatility to be moved around in the secondary and the mental fortitude to operate in a split safety based system would be a welcome addition. Next up we got the Cincinnati Bengals, and for them I put down inline tight end. This is a position that has certainly benefited in Cincinnati from being part of an offense that features the best trio of receivers league-wide and one of the top 2 quarterbacks. CJ Uzomah and Hayden Hurst have averaged over 450 receiving yards these past 2 seasons as the clear number 4 options in the passing attack, but I'd say those were more useful players than what they have at their disposal heading into 2023. The Bengals did sign Irv Smith Jr. for this year at $1.75 million after the Vikings let his rookie contract run out, having traded for TJ Hawkinson midway through last season once Irv got hurt, and he really wanted to upgrade anyway. Drew Sample, who since he's somewhat surprisingly drafted in the 2nd round back in 2019, will be back for the final year of his rookie deal after missing all but 2 games this past season, yet he's been almost a pure blocker for this group with a career mark of just 0.75 yards per route run. Mitchell Wilcox basically fulfilled that same role in his place as more of an extra offensive tackle when he went to 2 tight end sets, before they embraced the identity of much of a spread out 11 personnel team anyway. He's now gone, while Devin Asiasi is a fringe roster candidate by NFL standards. The idea of getting the collection of Chase, Higgins and Boyd out there at the same time is still based on being multiple in the ways that they can attack defenses, which is indicated by the 5th best rushing success rate league-wide from week 5 on, when we saw that shift in personnel usage. Since they don't have a tight end on the roster who's been a valuable blocker and receiver, that's a position they should still be looking for opportunities to upgrade at. Backup cornerbacks were the put down for the Cleveland Browns. They've quietly had a really strong offseason, making several key underrated signings and putting together one of the better draft classes considering the capital available, along with adding more weapons to what was a fairly shallow receiving corps, acquiring Elijah Moore from the Jets for a day 2 pick swap, and drafting Tennessee Cedric Tillman 74th overall. They brought in beef with a couple of legit shade nose tackles to boost one of the softer run defenses in the league, and address that edge spot across from Myles Garrett through multiple avenues. Therefore, as I look at the starting 11 and even the depth in the trenches and now also at wide receiver, there isn't much to really worry about, A position group that could still become an issue in case of injury is the cornerback room. They had already invested a couple of first round picks and found themselves a potential gem early in the third round last year's draft with Martin Emerson to form an excellent starting trio. And I believe they made a good value pick in the top 150 this past April in Cameron Mitchell from Northwestern, who could ultimately back up all three spots or just slide in as the fourth man, along with doing some shuffling around. However, there's quite a bit to ask of the rookie to immediately perform, and really beyond that, there's not much they can rely upon between Mike Ford, A.J. Green III, Thomas Graham Jr. and Chris Westry. Despite being part of teams that weren't rich on corners, Mike Ford has combined for basically the same amount of snaps over the last 4 years across 3 different cities, as he did as a rookie, a slightly above 300, and the others have combined for just 659 snaps over these past 2 seasons. Considering those guys mostly performed up to those expectations, I'd define all of them also as fringe roster candidates. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I believe, could still certainly use some help at inside linebacker. The Steelers may be the least intriguing team in the North for general NFL fans, and they're currently the betting favorites to finish 4th, but looking at how they address the areas of need this offseason, they should be a lot more solid. With at least 2 new starters on the O-line, most likely, and quality depth behind it, top 50 pick Keanu Benton from Wisconsin, being another worker bee to firm up the interior D-line, and a nice combination of youth and experience at cornerback, all 3 of those position groups clearly look better on paper. Putting together what I believe was one of the top 3 draft classes across the league was a major factor in that. The one unit on the team I'm still pretty worried about is the second level of the defense. They swapped out the tandem of Miles Jack and Devin Bush, whose heads were spinning quite a bit last year as I watched them try to add D-keys and put themselves in the according positions on tape, for maybe a little more solid, but also not overly inspiring duo of Cole Holcomb and Elandon Roberts. The former of those has graded between 56 and 67 by PFF's metrics in each of his 4 seasons in Washington. He's missed less than 7% of his tackling attempts over the latter 2 of those, whilst playing 99% of snaps across the 23 games he's been available for, but he's not been a plus as a coverage or pressure play on passing downs. Meanwhile, Elandon Roberts is this thumping inside backer who has helped the Dolphins get to 3rd and long after being brought over from New England by his former defensive coordinator and then head coach Brian Flores. But once they got to those situations, this guy was consistently subbed off the field. So while I would like them to bring in a more rangy option to that group, I think we probably see them move down Keanu Neal as a dime back in passing situations. Moving on to the AFC East, where first up we got the Buffalo Bills. And for them I put down a reliable number 2 receiver. They may be relying on up to 3 rookie starters this year, but I'd say what has held them back in crucial playoff moments is not having that second guy who can win in the pass game. I outlined Gabe Davis as a breakout candidate last offseason because a lot of the underlying metrics suggested his growth over the second half of the year were a sign of things to come, and I envisioned a more multifaceted role for him, in particular as a power slot, where his blocking skills and ability to work the middle of the field could really shine. However, he actually only spent just over 10% of snaps lined up on the inside in 2022, and was largely just a clear out guy who did basically send on wind sprints on the perimeter for large stretches of games. Plus, he didn't always come through for them either when needed, dropping 957 catchable targets. They did sign free agent Deontay Hardy, who quietly put up 570 receiving yards with the Saints in 2021, before missing almost all of last season with turf toe. And I was a big fan of last year's 5th round pick Khalil Shakir at Boise State, who showed some real signs late in the season once he started phasing out Isaiah McKenzie. There were some impressive moments of body control and toughness through contact, but he also had a couple of bad drops, even though I expect him to be the starting slot in 3 wide receiver sets. You just like Buffalo to find another guy they can rely upon to win his matchups with consistency and be potential high volume targets if defensive coordinators give extra attention to Stephon Diggs. Right now, I'd feel best about 1st round tight end Dalton Kincaid out of Utah being that guy, but I was also thinking in the mold of somebody who forces opponents to stay honest with not being able to leave a secondary outside receiver singled up. The Miami Dolphins are next up, and I think they still haven't found a solution at right tackle. The Fins are in the process of going all out during this window, but they still have quarterback Tua Tagovailoa on his rookie deal. With the additions of Bradley Chubb, Jalen Ramsey, and David Long Jr. since November, combined with a drastic schematic shift, with Vic Fangio taking over play calling duties on defense, that unit has a chance to be one of the best in the league. Meanwhile, Mike McDaniel's attack was top 5 in EP per play with a healthy Tua, and by adding Texas A&M running back Devon Achane in the 3rd round, this is pretty undoubtedly the fastest collection of skill position players this game has ever seen. On paper, tight end is a position that leaves things to be desired, but understanding how to use Alec Ingold as a move blocker who often starts in line even though he's tagged as a fullback. That's the reason a player like Mike Gesicki simply didn't have a role in the system. Where I do believe they're hoping for better play collectively is the offensive line, which thanks to the heavy focus on RPOs and play actions that look very similar, was protected to a large extent, but the individual pieces are still underwhelming. A healthy Teron Armstead at left tackle is by far the best of the bunch, with Connor Williams at center and Robert Hunt at least being average starters. Left guard is certainly in question, where I'm assuming either third-year player Liam Eichenberg settles in after a couple of pretty rough seasons, being asked to fill in at 3 different spots, or the move recently signed Isaiah Wynn there. The latter of those spent 83% of his snaps in New England during his rookie deal at left tackle, with a little bit of a run one spot over, and then having by far his worst year in 2022 when asked to step in at right tackle. He could be in competition for that job yet again in Miami, but right now it appears that Austin Jackson is the preferred option, who's had 3 catastrophic seasons so far since being drafted in the first round of 2020, with just 2 total games with a PFF grade of at least 70. The term I put down for the New England Patriots is a separation type of outside receiver. If you browse through the Pats draft class, having Oregon's Christian Gonzalez fall to them at 17th overall allows them to move everybody else down 1 spot in the depth chart and gives them a legit boundary corner to complement those shorter guys with great click and close ability that they've brought in recently. Beyond that, obviously selecting 2 no-kicking specialists and spending 3 early D3 picks on the offensive line to replenish that depth up front stand out as Patriots' typical moves, along with a couple of 6th round receivers. However, while I like a bunch of the guys that they did end up bringing in, the lack of investments into the last position I just mentioned is what had me scratching my head a little bit. Transitioning to the current wide receiver depth chart, Devontae Parker is as close to a pure ball winner as we have in the NFL today probably. Juju Smith-Schuster is who they wanted to replace Jacoby Myers for, in order to lean even more into the skill set of a power slot, and we know that one of the 5 or 6 receiver spots on the active roster goes to special teams captain Matthew Slater. Kendrick Bourne is as close as you're going to get in the mold of an early separator, looking at how productive he was for stretches in San Francisco as a Kyle Shanahan style X receiver, but there's a reason they inevitably wanted to upgrade to Brandon Ayuk to give themselves more of a yak threat. So it'll be up to how much growth a healthy Tyquan Thornton can show in his 2nd season as a former round 2 selection, and if they get anything from those 2 6th rounders this year in Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas. According to Next Gen Stats, they actually lost the top separator among wide receivers with an average depth of target above 10 yards per in Nelson Agholor at 3.3 yards average. Meanwhile, Devontae Parker actually finished dead last in that data bank in that metric at 1.7, which lists everybody with at least 45 targets. And finally, in terms of the AFC East, we got the New York Jets, and backup linebacker was my choice here. What matters most for Gang Green this upcoming season is how dramatic of an upgrade they might get in terms of quarterback play, as they made the big trade for Aaron Rodgers shortly before the draft. The offense was at least competent last season, until they lost 2 rising stars at guard and running back, with Elijah Vera Tucker and Breece Hall. Ultimately, Garrett Wilson was able to still win Offensive Rookie of the Year, despite highly inconsistent quarterback play. So with Rodgers bringing in a couple more pieces with him, the offense should go to another level in order to complement what was a top 6 defense in DVOA and EPA per play this past season. Depending on what the MRIs show on Chuck Clark's knee, it should at least be a lateral move to him, or the subsequently signed Adrian Amos in place of LaMarcus Joyner. They're bringing back the rest of the starting 11 and added Will McDonald IV out of Iowa State to boost the edge pass rush. The one wildly known name missing is Quan Alexander, who played just under half of the defensive snaps in the 3 linebacker rotation. With him gone, they've got lots of big safety or dimebacker types, beyond the starting duo of CJ Mosley and Quincy Williams. You're looking at Jamin Sherwood and Hamza Nasruddin as similar player profiles in their mold, who have combined for slightly over 200 snaps across their first 2 seasons. Jazz Surratt is a former quarterback convert at UNC, whose ability to make plays in coverage has always been far superior to making any reads between the tackles. Plus then Zaire Barnes was a guy that they picked in the 6th round, largely based on deflect testing, to project as an impact special teamer. I believe they have some solutions at passing downs, but if either one of the 2 starters goes down, I'm concerned with the run defense and how that will affect everything else. Let's head down south now and look at the Houston Texans, and I put on swing tackle for them. With DeMeco Ryans coming back to Houston in order to run the show there, combined with making the big move in the draft to secure themselves cornerstone pieces on either side of the ball in quarterback CJ Stroud from Ohio State and edge defender Will Anderson Jr. from Alabama, the Texans have set the baseline for turning around the franchise. They've created a nice balance between veterans coming in and players that they've drafted over the last couple of years. Before we see exactly how this shakes out, and if the young guys can step up when called upon, I don't believe any of the likely starting 22 is a definite minus at this point. However, what I can identify as a potential issue would be an injury to the bookends on the offensive line in Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard. Greg Little is a former Big Ten disappointment as an early second round pick for the Panthers in 2019, who's landed on IR each of the past 3 seasons, missing all of 2021 before seeing time on either end of the O-line for a tackle-desperate Dolphins team, yet he put up an abysmal PFF grade of just 35.1 on the year. Meanwhile, Charlie Hack has been a pretty consistent backup option with 7 sacks and 40 total pressures surrendered across just under 700 pass blocking snaps, but he's a minus in the run game and has never played a single snap anywhere but right tackle. And then last year's 6th rounder Austin Deculus didn't get onto the field on offense once as a rookie, especially with more of a traditional pocket passer and Stroud. Making him comfortable at the top of his drop and not asking him to move sideways will be key to a solid debut campaign. We stick on the offensive line with the Indianapolis Colts, and for them I put on established O-line depth. This is a unit that was supposed to be the biggest strength for the team in 2022, but turned out to be an absolute nightmare because of a turnstile-like affair on the blind side for about half the year, an offensive system that lacked clarity on who they were, and a general drop-off in quality of play, even from accomplished veterans such as Quentin Nelson and Ryan Kelly, with Braden Smith at right tackle to me is the only constant. Bernard Ryman, they hope can take a significant step forward as the starting left tackle as a 3rd round pick from last year, and right guard appears to be battled out between Danny Pinter, Will Fries, and I believe even undrafted free agent Emil Achior from Alabama could be part of the competition, as somebody I had inside my top 100 overall prospects this past April. No matter who starts there, even though it may not be as drastic to compensate for as one of the tackle spots because you have those bumpers to either side of you with condensed space to manage, it has the potential to be a legit weak link yet again. And even more so, you won't have proven alternatives to Weird Wards. That 3-man pool will also likely be chosen from in case of an injury at the pivot, and you might be looking at a developmental tackle project in Blake Freeland from BYU, who they made one of the first selections of day 3 in the draft this year, as a primary option in case of injury to either edge of the line, because with his athletic gifts, this is not somebody you can actually hope will stick on the practice squad, yet I believe he has plenty to fix before surviving in the NFL. The outlook in case of any injury might not be very rosy. Next up we got the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I put on flexible backup interior defensive lineman for them. While Roy Robertson-Harris has been a high impact performer playing anywhere between the tackle and guard for his career, and really took over stretches of games late this past season, I believe something that could be key for Jacksonville's defense is that duo of true defensive tackles in Devon Hamilton and Fuller Ronsifer Tukasi. In particular, I believe the interchangeability of lining up in the A or B gap and making those late shifts depending on facing motion, and how key it could be for the ability to stop the run, is something I'll be tracking. With that being said, I'm interested in what will happen if they face teams that force them to stay in base personnel largely, or how comfortable they are generally in rotating in those second string pieces. Adam Gotsis had 3 really strong outings last season for Denver, as I look at his weekly grades for Pro Football Focus, but otherwise the number was almost exclusively between 50 and 60. Michael Dogby has less than 700 career snaps across his 4 years in Arizona, for good reason, with his past season being his worst yet. And they did draft Tyler Lacey out of Oklahoma State in the 4th round, but I actually said this also in my AFC South draft and roster review, how to me is basically an insurance policy for Robertson-Harris getting banged up or just needing some snaps off to stay fresh, as somebody who in college almost purely landed up between 4-eye and 6 technique. There's really nothing to rely upon if one of the 2 stars on the interior goes down, and that could force them into being a pure even front unit, where Robertson-Harris is a true free technique, and you need to switch him and the nose shortly before the snap, based on the offensive picture changing, or some other creative ways to utilize gap exchanges. And finally for the South, a lot more clear here with the Tennessee Titans, I listed Z receiver. I could have easily gone with backup linebacker here, since the Titans swapped out a duo on the second level defensively for 2 potential breakout candidates with extended playing time in Monty Rice and Aziz Al-Shire, but they're banking on Ben Neiman, coming off his first season of any quality play, to be a band-aid in case of injury, with nothing else behind it. However, it's more fun to talk about wide receivers here, and dynamic play from that position is what this group is lacking the most right now. Last year's 1st round pick and basically a direct replacement for AJ Brown, considering they used the very pick they got back from Philadelphia to draft this guy with a very alike player profile. Treylon Burks showed in sparks that he can excel in similar ways as a big-bodied vertical threat and run-after-catch specialist over the middle. they were able to bring back Nick Westbrook-Akine for another year at $1.25 million, as another guy who can win through contact and be an option as a big slot. Plus I do like Cal Phillips as more of a quick-footed separator underneath, who can win on more intricate routes, as somebody who was off to a promising start as a 5th round pick last year, before having his rookie season cut short by hamstring injuries. He can play the Z to some degree, but isn't a typical offset flanker that forces defenses to play somebody over the top of, in order to provide one-on-one opportunities on the backside, or who you want to set up run-after-catch opportunities for, as you motion them into stacks and provide free access on crossing routes, for example. They just don't really have anybody else on the roster in that mold, and it makes it easier for defenses to box you in to some degree, as you don't attack all areas of the field. That brings us to the final division now with the AFC West, and we start things off with the Denver Broncos, another team who have put on interior O-line depth. The Broncos are experienced a dramatic shift defensively, going from Vic Fangio leading into one of his disciples in Ejiro Evero, who want to base things around a lot of split safety structures and light boxes, to the aggressive mindset of Vance Joseph, who wants to dictate terms to his opponents by bringing extra bodies in the pass rush. While there may be a bit of an adjustment period, and they'll need some of the young guys to step up, they have all the pieces there to continue playing at a high level. Once Sean Payton took over head coaching duties, he immediately snatched the reins away from general manager George Payton and invested major financial resources into the offensive line, with left guard Ben Powers and right tackle Mike McGlinchey, who they're paying nearly $140 million combined to over the next 4 years. However, looking at the rest of the depth chart, while Julian Fleming had labeled as a quality backup with extensive experience at either tackle spots, they don't have anybody else of note to back up one of those 3 interior spots. Quinn Bailey and Luke Waltenberg have combined for just over 300 snaps in their young careers so far, with 5 combined seasons between the two, and Kyle Fuller, not the former Bears Pro Bowl cornerback, has logged triple-digit snaps in just one of his 5 seasons as a pro. With the third to last selection of this year's draft, they did add Oregon's Alex Forsyth, who actually looked as one of the biggest sleepers at that position. However, considering the makeup of this Broncos O-line, a more gap-heavy approach seems likely based on the personnel at hand, while I looked at the rookie as a pure wide zone center, unless you facilitate a role that enhances his blocking on the move, which creates a pretty stark contrast to the current star of the pivot in Lloyd Cushenberry. The Kansas City Chiefs, I believe, are still looking for a big body pass catcher. Like I said in my AFC West draft and roster review, I wasn't a huge fan of the class Kansas City put together in late April, or the way that they've approached the departure of the starting tackle duo. While they paid a steep price for Juwan Taylor at $20 million annually, if they keep him at right tackle, I think that's a definite upgrade over Andrew Wiley, but for the reason to feel comfortable with that move, to be signing veteran Donovan Smith to protect Patrick Mahomes' blindside is worrisome to me. Not only did he allow 6 sacks last season, but he was also tied for a league-high 13 penalties called against him, and that could have easily been even more, considering they still have Lucas Niang as a primary backup, and selected a developmental player in Wanya Morris at the end of the top 100. I trust him for now, and while Frank Clark now having signed for a year with the division rivals in Denver means they don't have that high rusher and finisher type off the edge, they did restock that group, and I will instead now focus on the pass catching group offensively. The Chiefs have a couple of potential breakout candidates at wide receiver in Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, along with designated threat vertically and horizontally in Marcus Valdes-Scantling, and a reliable over-the-middle target in Richard James Jr. being brought over from the Giants. However, with the loss of Juju Smith-Schuster as the power slot, unless you consider MVS anything like a big receiver other than having that long build, the only receiver with any pro experience that is at least 6 foot and 205 pounds is Justin Watson, who saw the field quite a lot, but more so as a blocker or a sporadic deep threat. They don't have anybody else other than Travis Kelce, who they like consistently working between those short to intermediate zones, with the frame to lend itself to that role. Maybe they expect 5th rounder Colin Powell or UDFA Justin Ross from last year to actually contribute, as they combined for just 3 snaps due to injury so far. Otherwise, DeAndre Hopkins would almost be a perfect fit still. For the Las Vegas Raiders, I put on right guard. Even the most optimistic Raiders fans have to be concerned about this defense, which other than the underrated superstar Max Crosby, has maybe 2 other players who would start on half of the other teams across the league. I could see a bunch of recent draftees step into prominent roles fairly quickly, but if this pass rush can consistently get home without sending extra bodies, with the addition of a freak of nature in 7th overall pick Tyree Wilson for Texas Tech, defensive coordinator Patrick Graham has shown that he can muddy up the picture on the back end enough to give the front some time to win, even without high-level coverage players. I'd rather look at the offensive side of the ball, however, where Josh McDaniels will continue building around more of an old-school 21 personnel rushing attack, spearheaded by Josh Jacobs, assuming he ultimately signs a franchise tender. But despite the lack of a traditional deep threat receiver, you also have enough pass catchers who can win matchups and understand how to attack space when you want to spread defenses out. Assuming Jimmy G's foot is fine by the season opener, O-line is the one unit that really worries me still. In particular, if Dylan Parham stays at left guard in his second season, the right sides could end up being a major problem. Alex Bars and Jermaine Illuminor are currently slated to be the starter at guard and tackle respectively. The latter of those has a track record that would suggest this past season was more so an outlier, but he did earn Bafai's best PFF grade of his career at 75.3 and might have finally settled in at one spot. Bars on the other hand has never graded above 53.3 in his 4 seasons as a pro, with 50 total pressures across 965 pass blocking snaps. Behind him, Netani Muti and Ronis Grasu have combined for just 750 snaps over the last 3 years, and Greg Van Roten has always been a replacement level option. The only name I'm somewhat excited about is undrafted free agent McClendon Curtis, who has tremendous natural power but will face a drastic learning curve coming from UT Chattanooga in the FCS. And the final team here, the Los Angeles Chargers, I put on combo tight end for them. The big story for the Bolts heading into 2023 is the fundamental shift from the areas they want to attack offensively, going from the least vertically oriented and pretty static offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi to a much more diverse play call on Kellen Moore, combined with drafting TCU's Quentin Johnston in the first round. Opponents will need to account for a downfield passing attack and yards after catch threats to a far larger extent. However, looking at the underlying numbers for the Moore coordinated 22 Cowboys, in neutral game script situations at least, they were the most efficient out of 12 personnel. Now, by drafting Johnston to give the receiving corps more run after catch dynamism, to add to a ball winning vertical target in Mike Williams, and a slippery route running master in the slot in Keenan Allen, you'd think they want to get those 3 guys out on the field together quite a bit. Yet their offensive coordinator has generally worked with more traditional wide tight ends, and in order to still have that run-pass balance, a guy at that spot with the ability to be a plus contributor in both facets should be something they're looking for in order to complete the skill position group. Gerald Everett is most a glorified slot receiver and H-back, who should benefit from getting the ball thrown to him on the move with space to work with on run-after-catch opportunities, but he's not somebody you want to run behind at the points. Donald Parham is a typical former basketball player converted into an oversized flex tight end who can win over the heads of defenders, and in particular on the goal line. And finally, Trey McKitty is a profile for that role, but he's been almost a pure blocker, and he's been questionable at that. For his 2-year career, he has a yards per route run mark below 0.5 yards, and last year he literally ranked dead last among the 103 tight ends with at least 50 blocking snaps in terms of PFF grade at just 32.2. However, that wraps up this 2-part series on the biggest remaining needs for each NFL team heading into 2023. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy my videos, then why don't you show me by smashing that like button, as people like to say, subscribing for episodes in the future, and maybe you could help me out by spreading the word with a few friends to help grow this channel together. Make sure to let me know in the comments if there's a player you'd still like your team to add, and as you can tell, I started putting some live music in the background. Would love some feedback on that too. One more reminder that I already ran through all 8 divisions in depth and provided analysis on every single player selected in the draft and the state of each team's roster in my divisional draft and roster review series here on YouTube. I created a playlist for that, and of course you can find my written content and everything else I post on my page at footballtalk.com. The link for that is down below in the video description, along with my social media handles. I've got a bunch of cool stuff in the works over the summer, including young breakout candidates for 2023, my personal top 100 players list I release every year, and so much more. So you might as well hop along for the ride rather than listening to the 1000th Jordan versus LeBron debate at this point of the year. So until then, see you later. Peace!